There is a particular cruelty in handing someone a task built for their ruin and calling it a chance. You cannot force a frightened thing to trust you, not a horse, not a person, and every man who tries only teaches it to run faster. They gathered along the fences of Aldermere that gray morning to watch a stable girl die. The Duke's black stallion had thrown 3 breakers and killed 1. When the Duke held the lead rope out to her, the crowd was already laughing. By sunset, the Duke of Aldermere stood bareheaded in the dust and asked her to teach him. The cold at Aldermere rose up through the stone floor of the stables long before the sun cleared the hills, and Tamsin Reeve had learned years ago to do her best work before it woke the rest of the house. She moved down the long row of loose boxes in the blue dark, barehanded, despite the frost, because her father had taught her that a horse reads your gloves the way a man reads a drawn curtain as something you are hiding behind. By the time the groom stumbled in yawning, she had already mucked 6 stalls, mixed the morning feeds, and coaxed a mouthful of warm mash into the old gray mare, who had refused everything for 2 days. There was a young bay colt in the end box, bought green and gone sour, who had bitten 2 men to the bone that week. Sedge, the head groom, had pronounced him rig-mad and fit only for the knacker's cart. Tamsin let herself into his box, with no halter at all. She did not look at him. She stood with her shoulder to his, and her eyes on the far wall, and she breathed, slow and slower, until the white went out of his eye, and his neck came down, and at last his soft muzzle found the back of her bare hand and stayed there. Only then did she ease the halter on. "Witchcraft," muttered a groom from the aisle. She had heard the word her whole life. It was not witchcraft. It was only attention, which most people she had found feared a good deal more. Her hands were her whole fortune, chapped, scarred white across the knuckles, and quieter than any voice in the county. Her father used to say, "A man shouts because he never learned how to be still." Tamsin had learned to be still long before she learned to read. Her father had been the finest horseman in the county, and the poorest, a pairing the county found endlessly amusing. When a strangles outbreak tore through the Aldermere yards 9 years past, it was Warren Reeve who nursed the survivors through the worst of it, and Warren Reeve who borrowed against his own name to replace the dead stock when the old Duke would not. He died with the debt still owing and the note already sold out from under him into the hands of a man named Silas Vane. Vane was a dealer, of horses, of paper, and of people when the paper allowed it. He had bought Warren Reeve's debt for pennies and held it over Tamsin ever since, like a hand raised and never quite let fall. She could not leave Aldermere. The bond tied her labor to the estate until it was cleared, and Vane took quiet care that it never quite cleared. She had been 18 when her father died. She was 26 now, and she no longer counted the years the way other women counted theirs in dances, in seasons, in suitors. She counted them in horses. The thing that was meant to ruin her. She learned the way she learned everything, by being invisible. She was in the tack room past dusk, working oil into a stiff bridle, when Vane's voice came through the thin plank partition, that smooth, unhurried voice of his that always sounded as though it were doing you a favor. "And the beauty of it," he was saying, "is that no one will have made her do a thing. She's told half the county. The great brute is gentle underneath. Grieving, she says, if you please, as though a horse mourns like a widow in black. So we let her prove it. We put the devil in the yard, and we put her in with him, and we let nature take its course in front of the Duke, and every buyer I can crowd on to that fence, and if the horse don't oblige, Rav." That was Sedge, low and doubtful. "Then she is humiliated before the whole county, and I call the bond in at first light, and she goes to the workhouse or somewhere colder. And the horse is condemned, a man-killer, either way, which makes him mine to sell for whatever a curiosity fetches. A pause, and the creak of Vane leaning back. You see the elegance of it, Sedge. By tomorrow night I own the finest blood in the north, and I am rid of the one girl in the county clever enough to say I stole it. See that the fence is full. A thing like this wants an audience. Tamsin sat very still, the bridle forgotten across her knees, and did not let herself breathe again until his footsteps had faded down the yard. So, a spectacle then. She was to be the joke of the season, the mud-poor stable girl with notions above her station torn open in the dirt by the very horse she had been fool enough to defend. She could run. She had thought about running every single day for 8 years, but running took coin she did not have, and it meant leaving the black horse to a man who would teach him the whip and the empty manger. And there was one more thing which she could have confessed to no living soul. She did not believe the horse would kill her. She had watched him for 3 months from the far side of his paddock. Corvus they called him, for his coat was the blue-black of a crow's wing. She had seen the old scars laid under that gloss, and the way he shied from a lifted arm, and the way he stood some evenings with his head over the rail, staring down the empty lane as though waiting for a rider who was never ever coming back. Whatever the county named him, devil, man-killer, rig-mad Tamsin named him something quieter. She named him Heartbroken, and a heartbroken thing, she knew better than most, does not want to kill you. It only wants to be let alone by the people who have hurt it, and it has no earthly way of telling them apart from you. She worked the bridle until the leather went soft in her hands. She slept a little, and poorly, and in the gray hour before dawn, she walked out to the yard, where they had already begun to line the fences. Dozens of them, breath-steaming white, faces lit with that particular brightness people wear when they have come to watch someone else be destroyed and to feel warm about it afterward. At the center of the yard, the stable door stood shut. Behind it, something vast and dark shifted its weight from one foot to the other, and then went, utterly, watchfully, still. The murmur along the fence found her the moment she stepped into the open, and it had teeth in it. There she is. The horse which, come to charm him, Sedge moved into her path. He was a big man gone to fat, with a face like a boiled ham, and a fondness for his small cruelties. "Changed your mind, girl," he said loud enough for the rail. "No shame in it. Go on back to your muck heap where you belong, and we'll say no more." The fence laughed on cue. Tamsin did not answer him. She had learned long ago that a shut mouth unsettles a bully far more than any clever reply. She stepped around him and looked past his shoulder at the shut stable door. The Duke stood apart from the rest, near the mounting block, and she knew him at once, though she had never once stood near enough to speak. Leander, Duke of Aldermere. He was younger than the grief on him made him look tall, and unnervingly still, and dressed more plainly than any lord had a right to be. His right hand was gloved where every other man's was bare, and he held it a little in against his side, the way a man holds a thing that has failed him. He was not laughing. He was staring at the shut door as though he loathed it, and could not for his life look away. Vane materialized at the Duke's elbow, all warmth and teeth. "Your Grace, the girl did insist. She has such tender theories about the animal. Only fair we let her prove them." He lifted his voice for the crowd. "Bring the black out." 2 grooms brought Corvus into the light on a line apiece, one hauling at each cheek-piece. The horse came sideways and furious out of the dark, and the whole fence swayed backward as a single frightened creature. He was vast, He was gleaming. He was, by every account the county owned, a killer. And Tamsin, watching from 30 feet away, saw none of the things they saw. "Take the lines off him," she said. The yard went quiet. "Are you deaf as well as mad?" Sedge barked. "He'll be over that fence and into the crowd before. He's fighting the lines. He isn't fighting you." Her voice was low and level, and it carried the length of the yard. "Look at his ears. Every man here is watching his teeth, and not one of you has watched his ears. They're turned on me. He isn't trying to get out. He's trying to get away from 2 grown men hanging off his mouth." She paused, and something in the pause made even Vane hold still. "Take them off him. Give him room. He'll stand. He wants to stand. No one has let him do a single quiet thing in a very long time." For a long moment, nobody moved at all. Then the Duke of Aldermere crossed the yard. He did not go to Vane, and he did not go to Sedge. He went to the 2 grooms, and with one low word, sent them stumbling back from the horse's head, and he reached up and unclipped both lines from the black stallion's mouth himself, with that ruined right hand he kept so carefully hidden. Then he turned, and there, before the buyers, before Vane, before the hungry length of the fence, he held the lead rope out to a bare-handed stable girl. "Show me," said the Duke. Tamsin looked at the rope in his hand. She did not take it. Instead, she stepped past it, and past him, out into the bare, open middle of the yard, and she turned her back on the most dangerous horse in the North Riding. Behind her, Corvus's great head came up. His nostrils flared wide, drinking the scent of her. His weight rolled forward onto the balls of his feet, and then he moved, and then he moved. The crowd made a single sound, a sharp collective intake, and someone at the rail cried out a warning. A ton of black muscle came up off its haunches and drove toward her, and every instinct a living body owns screamed at Tamsin to run. She did not run. She kept her back to him, and her eyes on the gray hills beyond the fence, and she let her breath run long and slow, the way her father had drummed into her before she was tall enough to stand under a Carthorse without stooping. Fear travels down a rope and up an arm, and straight into the animal, he used to say. So does its opposite. Give him the opposite. She gave him the opposite. The drumming of hooves closed on her until it filled the whole world, and then at the very last it did not strike. It broke and swung and curved away. She felt the heat of him wheel around her once, twice, a great black storm orbiting a single still point, near enough that the wind of him lifted the loose hair at her neck. She did not turn to look. Turning to look is a question, and she had no questions to ask him. She had only time, and she was willing to spend all of it. The circling slowed. The hoofbeats gentled to a walk, then to a step, then to nothing at all. She felt his breath before anything else, a warm gust against the back of her shoulder, and then the side of her throat, hay-sweet and enormous. She waited until she felt the whole vast engine of him settle out of its readiness to bolt. Only then did she turn, slowly, no faster than a shadow crossing a floor, and lift the back of one bare, scarred hand toward his lowered head. Corvus breathed her in. And then, before 300 witnesses who had come to watch her torn apart in the dirt, the most dangerous horse in the north dropped his head the last few inches and rested it, heavy and tired and trusting, against her open palm. The yard went so quiet she could hear the flags snapping over the gatehouse. Tamsin stood with the horse's great heavy head cradled against her, feeling his heartbeat slow beneath the enormous warmth of him, and thought, there you are. Not a devil, not a man-killer. only a creature who had been asked the wrong question by every person who ever met him and had been answering it honestly all along. Nobody cheered. It was not that kind of silence. It was the silence of a great many people discovering all at once that they had been wrong about something and did not enjoy the feeling. Vane broke it. "A trick," he said too loudly. "She's drugged the animal, or get off my land." The Duke did not raise his voice, and that was somehow worse than if he had. "All of you, the show is finished. There will be no sale today." He turned his head a fraction toward the head groom. "Sedge, clear the fence." They went. Grumbling, disbelieving, cheated of their blood, they went, and Vane went with them, though he took his time about it, and he did not once take his pale eyes off Tamsin as he walked to his carriage. He said nothing more. Somehow the saying of nothing was the loudest thing he had done all morning. Then the yard was empty, but for a girl, a horse, and a duke. Tamsin expected him to speak. Lords always spoke. It was how they reminded you which of you was real. But the Duke of Aldermere only stood where he was, a little apart, watching the black horse lip gently at her sleeve, and on his still face was an expression she had not been prepared for. It was not amazement. It was closer to grief, the particular grief of a man watching someone else do, easily, the thing that has been slowly killing him to fail at. "Do it again," he said at last. "It came out rough. Whatever you did, I want to see it again." So she showed him. She spent that whole long gray day in the yard, and the Duke never once left it. She asked for the 2 lines gone and got them. She asked for the round pen's gate opened and got that too. She did not haul on the horse or corner him or show him the whip. She did the opposite of everything that had ever been done to him. She walked away and let him choose to follow. She turned her shoulder and let him close the distance himself, at his own speed, on his own terms. Because a thing that is allowed to choose you will stay, she knew, and a thing that is forced will only ever be waiting for its chance to leave. By noon, Corvus followed her at a walk around the whole circumference of the pen, his nose a hand's breadth from her shoulder, like a shadow that had decided to come home. Once, a rook clattered up out of the oak by the gate, and Corvus came apart at the seams, spun, snorted, flung himself to the far rail with his tail clamped and his eyes gone white. At the fence, the Duke moved, a sharp, involuntary half-step, his good hand rising, the ruined one twitching against his side as though it had reached for a rein that was no longer there. But Tamsin did not chase, and did not scold. She sat down. She lowered herself onto an upturned bucket in the middle of the pen, folded her hands in her lap, and became, deliberately, the least interesting thing in Yorkshire. Within a minute, the horse's ears came off the sky and found her. Within 2, he had walked the whole way back to stand over her, blowing warm, astonished breath into her hair, as if to ask where she had gone. "You see," she said, not quite to the Duke, but he heard it. "You don't fetch them back. You make yourself worth coming back to." By mid-afternoon, she had laid a folded saddlecloth across his back and taken it off again a dozen times until the laying on of it meant nothing to him at all. And through every hour of it, the Duke watched, and slowly, without seeming to notice he was doing it, he came closer. He was, she began to understand, no idle spectator. He knew horses, knew them deeply. She could see it in the way his eye tracked the horse's hind foot, the way he read a flick of the ear a half-second before it turned to a threat. This was a horseman. And yet he kept that right hand of his, tucked always against his side, gloved, useless, held the way, you hold, a wound. Twice she caught him begin to speak, To correct her, perhaps, out of some old instinct, to command a yard he had once ruled. And twice he closed his mouth, and only watched, and learned. It cost a proud man a great deal to fall silent in his own pen. She respected the cost more than she could have respected any speech. Near dusk, she finally understood the whole shape of it. She had let Corvus go to graze the pen's thin grass, and she came to lean on the rail beside the Duke because her legs had stopped asking permission. For a while, neither of them spoke. The sun was going down behind the hills in a long bruise of orange and slate, and the horse cropped grass in the falling light, and the man beside her watched him with a hunger that had nothing to do with pride of ownership. "He was my brother's," the Duke said. Tamsin said nothing. She had learned that a silence held open is the kindest thing you can offer a man who is deciding whether to bleed. Rowan bought him green 3 years ago and made him into the finest thing on 4 legs I ever saw. His jaw worked. They understood each other the way you and he seem to. Then the regiment called us both to Spain, and Rowan did not come home, and the hand I could once have used to gentle his horse came home like this. He lifted the gloved hand an inch from his side, looked at it as though it belonged to a stranger, and let it drop. For a year I have tried to go near that animal. For a year he has tried to kill me for it. I told myself he was simply vicious. It was easier than the truth. "What's the truth?" she asked quietly. The Duke of Aldermere looked at her then, full on, and the last of the daylight caught his face and stripped it of everything. A title is meant to protect a man from being seen without. "That he smells the fear on me, and the grief. And he cannot tell mine from the men who hurt him before Rowan ever found him. I frighten him, Miss Reeve, because I am frightened. I have been frightened for a year, and I did not have a single word for it until I watched a stable girl turn her back on him and teach me what I look like." The horse lifted his head in the dusk and looked toward her, and took one slow step in their direction. The Duke drew a breath, and when he spoke again his voice had gone very low and steady, and it cost him something she could see. "Teach me," he said. "Whatever it is you know, whatever my brother knew and I was too proud to learn. I will pay you what you ask. Only teach me to stand in a yard with my brother's horse and not be afraid." The sun went down. Somewhere on the road beyond the gatehouse, a carriage that had waited too long finally turned and rolled away into the dark, and neither of them thought in that moment to wonder why Silas Vane had lingered to watch them after all. Vane did not make them wait long. The note came the next morning, before the frost was off the cobbles, carried by a boy who would not meet Tamsin's eye. It was written in Vane's own smooth hand, and it was, like everything he did, perfectly courteous, and entirely a knife. To Miss T. Reeve. This is to remind you that the bond upon your late father's debt, being the sum of £90 and held by myself, falls due in full at the Michaelmas quarter. As you cannot pay it, you will present yourself to my house on that morning to be placed in service at my discretion, per the terms your father signed. I remain and see. 1 Vane. R.A. Wan. P.S. I make no doubt the Duke will enjoy the black horse in what little time remains to you both. Tamsin read it twice, standing in the yard, and felt the old cold climb her spine. The cold of 8 years spent knowing that a man across the county could reach into her life whenever he chose and rearrange it. £90. She had at that moment 4 shillings and a spare shift. Michaelmas was 19 days away. 19 days to earn the one thing her father had spent a whole life unable to earn, the right to belong to no one. She folded the note very small and pushed it into her bodice, over her heart, where she could feel the edge of it, and she let the edge make her angry instead of afraid. Anger she could use, fear only ever traveled down the rope. She did not know the Duke had come up behind her until he took the note from her unresisting fingers and read it himself. She braced for pity. Pity was what she armored herself against most carefully, because pity was the thing that told you a person had already decided you were finished. He did not give her pity. He gave her something a great deal more useful. He got angry. £90. He said it the way another man might say the name of a disease. For a debt your father took on to save this estate's horses, when my own father was too much a miser to do it. I know the story, Miss Reeve. I have known it since I came home. That debt is a stain on this house, not on yours. He folded the note along its crease with a snap. I will pay it. This morning. £90 is. No. The word came out of her before she had decided to say it, and it surprised them both. He raised an eyebrow. You would rather go into Vane's service. I would rather not be a thing that is bought and moved from one man's shelf to another's, Tamsin said. Her voice shook, and she hated that it shook, and she went on anyway. You mean it kindly, I know you do. But if you pay Vane my debt this morning, then I am yours the way I was very nearly his, and I will spend the rest of my life wondering whether I am kept for what I can do or for what I cost you. I have been owned, Your Grace. I will not be owned gently. It is still owning. She waited for the anger to turn on her. It did not. Instead, the Duke looked at her for a long moment, with something like respect dawning behind his eyes, and then he did a thing she would turn over in her mind for many nights after. He inclined his head to her, a small bow. The kind of bow a man gives an equal. Then we will do it another way, he said. A wager of our own to answer his. Vane's whole case is that the horse is a man-killer, and you a fraud. So we ruin his case. You have 19 days. In 19 days you will make my brother's horse sound and gentle and fit to be ridden. By me, in front of every buyer and every gossip, Vane crowded onto that fence, and a good many more besides. Do that, and I do not pay your debt. I employ you, as master of horse at Aldermere, at a wage. By a contract you may read and sign, or tear up as you please. A wage clears £90 soon enough, and a wage is not a leash. When Michaelmas comes you will pay Vane yourself, and he will have to take the money from your own hand and call you Miss Reeve, while he does it. Why not simply crush him, she asked. You are a duke. Vane is a horse dealer, with a grudge and a bond that reads to my eye a good deal too neatly. Buy up his debts, ruin him, and be done. Something flickered across the Duke's face, a shadow of the same helplessness he wore around the horse. Because a year of grief makes a poor steward, he said, and I have not yet looked hard enough at my own affairs, nor at Vane's to move against him without a misstep, and a misstep would cost you far dearer than me. Give me time, and I will look. But time is precisely what his note has stolen from us both. He straightened, and the shadow burned off him. So we win the day first. Publicly, cleanly, where the whole county must stand and watch it happen. And then, Miss Reeve, I go hunting. Tamsin stared at him. It was, she thought, the first time in her whole life that anyone powerful had offered her a way out that left her standing on her own feet at the end of it. And if I fail? She asked. If 19 days isn't enough? Then I pay the debt anyway, and you may be as insulted as you like about it from the safety of not being in Vane's house. The corner of his mouth moved. the ghost of something that had not been a smile in a long time. "I am a duke, Miss Reeve. I am permitted to lose a wager and cheat at the forfeit." Despite everything, she nearly laughed. They shook on it, bare hand to gloved one, and it was only when his fingers closed around hers that she felt, through the leather, how badly the ruined hand was made, the missing knuckle, the fingers that would not fully straighten. He saw her feel it. He did not pull away, and neither did she, and something passed between them in the cold morning that neither would have known how to name. Then he did the last thing, and it was the thing that undid her. He sent Sedge openly, in front of the whole yard, to fetch a bridle from the locked tack-room that had been shut since Rowan died. When Sedge brought it, sullen and slow, the Duke took it in his good hand and held it out to her. A plain snaffle bridle, the leather soft with old care, the brow band worked with a single band of green thread by someone who had loved the horse that wore it. This was Rowan's, he said. He never once let a groom put a bit in that horse's mouth, but this one. It is the gentlest thing in this house. I can think of no one who has earned the right to carry it since. He pressed it into her arms. "You have the run of my yard, Miss Reeve. My grooms answer to you now, Sedge first of all. If any man here lays a rough hand on that horse, he answers to me." Sedge's boiled ham face went a dangerous shade, but he said nothing, and bowed and withdrew. But Tamsin had spent her whole life reading the language of men who were not permitted to strike you anywhere it might show. She saw the promise in the set of his shoulders as he went. Sedge had answered to Silas Vane far longer than he had ever answered to any duke, and a man like that did not surrender a yard he had ruled for 20 years to a bare-handed girl, without meaning, somewhere down the road, to take something back for it. That night, alone in the stable, by the light of a single lantern, Tamsin brought Rowan's bridle to show Corvus and let him mouth the old snaffle, and wept a little quietly, for reasons she could not entirely explain. For the brother she'd never met, for the man learning to be brave again, for herself standing at last on ground that felt like her own. And it was then, running her bare hand along the horse's neck in the low gold light, that her fingers found it, a ridge under the black coat where no ridge should be. She lifted the lantern, parted the hair. There laid across his flank, in a place a saddle would hide, were 3 fresh welts, the unmistakable print of a whip, no more than a day old. Someone had been in the stable after dark. Someone had been undoing her work, one lash at a time. She told no one at first. She could have gone straight to the Duke. The temptation was strong. But Tamsin had survived 8 years under a roof that despised her by learning when to speak and when to watch, and she watched now. She moved her own cot into the empty box beside Corvus's that very night. Ada, the housekeeper's, scandalized protests, and she slept there with the door bolted from the inside and one hand on the lantern. Whoever was creeping in with a whip would have to come past her to do it. No one came. Not the next night, nor the one after. Whoever it was, they knew now that the horse was watched, and that told her something in itself. This was no random cruelty. It was patient. It was waiting for its moment. It was, in a word, Vane's. So she did. The only thing she could do. She made the horse unbreakable in the way that actually mattered, not stubborn. Trusting. A horse that has decided a person is safe will forgive a great deal, and she meant to give Corvus a person to decide on. The days took on a shape. Each dawn she brought him out into the round pen in the blue cold, and did nothing that looked like work. She walked. He followed. She stopped. He stopped. She breathed slow. He lowered his head. On the 3rd morning, She laid the saddlecloth on and left it, and he wore it out to graze as though he'd forgotten it was there. On the 5th, she added the saddle, girthed loose, and he humped his back once and then stood blowing, and let her rub his neck until the tension ran out of him like water. On the 7th, she leaned her whole weight across his back, belly down, her feet still on the ground. The first weight he had borne in a year, and he turned his head and lipped at her boot, as if to ask whether that was quite all she meant to do about it. On the 8th morning she brought out Rowan's bridle. She had waited for it on purpose. The old snaffle carried a dead man's hands in every worn crease of the leather, and she wanted the horse steady before she asked him to remember. She warmed the bit in her bare palms. No horse should be asked to take frozen iron, and offered it flat on her open hand. And Corvus, who had fought every bit forced on him for a year, dropped his nose to the old snaffle, mouthed it, and took it as softly as a foal takes to its mother. He stood with Rowan's bridle on, his eyes half shut, and something in the great black body loosened that had been knotted tight since Spain. He remembered not the war, not the loss, the hands, the gentle, particular hands that had once put exactly this bit into exactly this mouth. Tamsin pressed her forehead to his cheek and let him remember for as long as he cared to. And every day the Duke came. At first he only watched from the rail, and did as she asked from a distance. Stand there, breathe the way I'm breathing. Do not look him in the eye. Let him come to you. She was hard on him. She spoke to a duke exactly as she spoke to a nervous colt, in the same low, even voice, with the same refusal to lie, and he took it. Took it better than any lord had a right to, because he wanted the thing at the end of it more than he wanted his pride. "You're holding your breath again," she told him on the 6th day, without turning around. "He can hear it. So can I. I am aware that I am holding my breath, Miss Reeve. I am holding it because there is a very large horse walking toward me. He's walking toward you because you stopped chasing him. That's the whole trick. That's the only trick." She glanced back, and found him standing dead still with Corvus's nose an inch from his shoulder and an expression of such careful, disbelieving hope on his face that something turned over in her chest. "There," she said more gently. "He chose you. Don't spoil it by thanking him. He'll think you're surprised." The Duke let out a breath that was half a laugh. And Corvus, feeling the laugh go through the man like warmth going through a wall, sighed, and dropped a hip, and rested. That was the first day the Duke of Aldermere smiled, really smiled, the whole grief lifting off his face like fog off water, and Tamsin had to look away, because it did something to her that a smile had no business doing. The hand came later. It was the 10th day and cold, and Corvus had let the Duke run a currycomb over him for the first time. A small thing, an enormous thing, and the Duke, forgetting himself entirely in the joy of it, reached up with his left hand to smooth the horse's forelock, and then, without thinking, began to strip off the glove on his right, so that he might feel the horse's coat properly, the way a horseman does. He stopped, the glove half off. His face closed. "You needn't," Tamsin said quietly. "You work bare-handed," he said, "in the frost. You told me the first day, a horse reads a glove like a drawn curtain." He looked at the ruined thing at the end of his arm, hidden still. "I have kept this curtain drawn for a year, Miss Reeve, against everyone." "Then keep it drawn against everyone," she said. "But this isn't everyone. This is a horse who has never once in his life cared what a man's hand looks like. He only cares what it does." For a long moment, the Duke was still. Then he pulled the glove off. The hand was bad. She would not insult him by pretending otherwise. 2 fingers gone at the knuckle, the rest seamed with old white scars. The whole of it curled like a thing that had learned to protect itself. He held it out, trembling very slightly, and laid it flat against the black horse's shoulder. Corvus turned his great head, breathed once across the ruined palm, and leaned into it. The Duke made a sound she pretended not to hear. "There," Tamsin said to the horse. "To the man, to the cold, bright morning. He doesn't think it's ugly, he thinks it's yours. That's a great deal more than most people manage." The Duke looked at her over the horse's neck, his bare, ruined hand pressed to the warm black hide, and whatever he had meant to say he did not say. He only looked at her, and she looked back, and the space between them across the horse's withers went suddenly very small and very charged, and it was Corvus who broke it, by lipping loudly at the Duke's coat pocket, in search of the carrot he could smell there, and nearly knocking his master off his feet. They laughed, both of them at once helplessly, the way people laugh when they have been holding something heavy for a long time, and have suddenly, without meaning to, set it down. It was, Tamsin thought afterward, the moment she stopped thinking of him as a duke. In the evenings, when the work was done and the horse turned out, they fell into the habit of leaning on the pen rail as the light went, neither quite ready to go indoors. She could not have said when it began. It was simply there one day like a path, worn across a field by feet that never agreed aloud to make it. He asked her once where she had learned. "My father," she said. He could gentle anything with a heartbeat. Dogs, horses, frightened children. "My mother, when the fever took her." She smiled at the darkening hills. He used to say the whole secret of it was to want nothing at all from the creature in front of you, for exactly as long as it takes them to begin to want something from you. Most people can't manage it. They want too loudly. "And you?" the Duke asked. "Do you want nothing?" There was something careful laid under the question. Tamsin was quiet a moment. "I have never been in a position to want much," she said. "It's made me very good at my work." She felt him turn his head to look at her, and she did not turn to meet it, because she was suddenly precisely aware of how near his shoulder was to hers along the rail, and of the fact that for the first time in 8 years she had begun to want a great deal, and not one single part of it was safe. The days ran down. 12, 14, 16. The horse grew sound, and easy, and bold. The man grew brave. The girl grew. She did not let herself finish the thought. There was a wager to win, and a debt to pay, and 19 days was not enough time to be a fool. Then, on the morning of the 17th day, 2 things arrived within the hour of each other. The first was Corvus, when she came to him at dawn. Not the horse she had left the night before, but the old horse, the wild one, eyes rolling white, plunging at the back of his box. A fresh welt stood raised along his flank, where a whip had bitten in the dark. The watched stable had been left unwatched for one single night. The one night Mrs. Ada had begged her to sleep indoors, out of the cold, and someone had chosen it exactly. She reached him the only way she knew, slow and low and bare-handed, murmuring the same 3 worthless, tender words over and over, until the fear ebbed out of his eye, and he let her come to the wound. It had been laid exactly where a girth would grind it raw, the instant anyone asked him to carry a saddle. Placed, she understood, with a sick lurch, by someone who knew precisely what she meant to do the next day, and precisely how to make it impossible. 17 days spent teaching a horse that hands could be trusted, unpicked in the dark by a single hand that could not. And the second, carried up from the gatehouse by a white-faced boy, while Tamsin stood shaking with fury and grief in the ruined calm of the stable, was a letter. Not from Vane this time, from an inn on the London road. It bore no seal, she knew, and its message was very short. The Duke of Aldermere is informed that Mr. Josiah Rourke, breaker of horses, by appointment to the finest stables in England, the man who has never yet met a horse he could not master, arrives at Aldermere tomorrow at noon, engaged by a concerned party to assess the black stallion and settle, once and for all, the question of whether it can be handled by a professional or must be destroyed. He looks forward to the demonstration. Tamsin read it, standing in the wreckage of 17 days' work, with her brothers, with Rowan's bridle in her hands and a terrified horse screaming behind her, and understood exactly what Vane had done. He had not tried to beat her, honestly. He had spent 19 days making certain she could not. Josiah Rourke arrived the next day at noon in a lacquered gig, wearing a coat the color of a fresh bruise, and the smile of a man who has never once in his life been made to wait. He was famous in the way cruel and efficient men often become famous. Even Tamsin had heard the name, the breaker who had subdued a killer stallion for a marquis in a single afternoon, or so the ballad went, the man who could take the wild out of anything with legs. He stepped down into the Aldermere yard as though the deed to it were already in his pocket, snapped his fingers for a groom to see to his gig, and surveyed the gathered crowd. For there was a crowd again. Vane had seen to that, with the deep contentment of an actor finding the house sold out. Vane came with him. Naturally, the two of them together moved with the ease of long partnership, and Tamsin understood, watching them, that Rourke had never been summoned to assess anything. He had been bought the way everything in Vane's world was bought, to deliver a verdict, already written. Rourke never glanced at the horse's eye or ear. He looked at its legs, its teeth, its likely price, the way a man appraises a table he means to sell on. "There's no such thing as an unbreakable horse," he informed the rail, warming to his audience. "Only horses that haven't yet met the right man. Fear is a language, friends, and I speak it, fluent. Give me an hour and a stout rope, and I'll have that devil doing tricks for pennies, or I'll have proved him fit for nothing but the kennels, which serves the same purpose and makes a deal less mess." The crowd liked that. The crowd always likes cruelty when it is confident. "So this is the animal," Rourke said, strolling to the pen rail. Corvus, still raw and wild from the night's sabotage, flung himself to the far side and stood trembling, the fresh wound weeping along his flank. Rourke's smile widened. "Dangerous, I'm told, uncontrollable, a man-killer." He said the words with relish for the crowd. "Fortunate for everyone that I was sent for before. Someone did something sentimental like let a girl be trampled trying to pet it. The rail tittered. Tamsin let it. She had placed herself between Rourke and the gate, and she did not move. "You'll not touch him," she said. "I beg your pardon, he's hurt. Someone laid a whip across him in the dark last night. You can see the wound from here if you trouble to look, which you won't, because you already know it's there." She kept her voice level, though her heart was slamming. "A hurt, frightened horse, handled by a stranger with a rope, is how men get killed. You know that better than I do. So, no, Mr. Rourke, you'll not touch him." Something shifted behind Rourke's showman's eyes, a flat, professional dislike. He came closer and dropped his voice so that only she and Vane could hear it. "I know all about this horse girl," he murmured. "I know he was the young lord's, the one who got himself killed in Spain and left his brother to rot up here with a ruined hand and a ruined nerve. I know his grace can't so much as saddle the thing without his nerve failing him entirely." The smile never wavered. "You've done a pretty trick, I'll grant you, but a trick's a trick. Tomorrow the whole county watches me put a real bridle on that horse and ride him round this yard. And every soul here learns what you are, a jumped-up stable girl with a knack and a duke too broken to know better. Then Mr. Vane collects what he's owed, and you go where girls like you go. Tamsin had been called worse. What frightened her was not the word. It was the certainty behind it. That's enough. Neither of them had heard the Duke come. He stood a pace away, and, though his ruined hand was tucked as ever against his side, there was nothing broken in his face now, nothing at all. He had heard. Tamsin realized. He had heard all of it. "You will not speak to her again," the Duke said to Rourke, quite pleasantly. "You will not speak of her again. This is Miss Tamsin Reeve. She is master of horse at Aldermere, appointed by me, and every animal on this land, including that one, is in her keeping, and hers alone. You are a hired man on my property, Mr. Rourke, and I find I do not care for your work. Get behind the rail with the rest of the spectators, or get off my land. You will not lay a finger on my brother's horse." The yard had gone very quiet. To be defended was so foreign to Tamsin that for a moment she could not feel her own hands. But Vane, curse the man, only smiled. "Fine words, your grace," he said smoothly, stepping forward. "But the wager stands, does it not? You gave your word before witnesses. Tomorrow is Michaelmas. Tomorrow the girl shows that beast gentle and rideable before the county, or she does not, and the debt falls due, and I am within my rights to have a dangerous animal destroyed and an unpaid debtor taken up." Rourke has merely offered his professional opinion for the record. He spread his hands. "Unless, of course, you'd like to withdraw. Pay me, now, quietly, and admit the girl's little miracle was never real." Tamsin looked at the wounded horse shaking in the corner of the pen one night to soothe a terrified, injured animal, and make him fit to be shown gentle before 300 people, when the girth alone would grind that wound to agony. It could not be done. Vane had made certain it could not be done. "We do not withdraw," the Duke said, but Tamsin heard underneath the words that he did not know how they would win, and neither, heaven help her, did she. That night, sleepless, she went out to sit with Corvus in the dark, and it was there, kneeling to change the dressing on his flank by lantern light, that she found the thing that changed everything, caught in the raw edge of the wound, driven deep, a single splinter of green-painted wood, the color of a fresh bruise, the color of Josiah Rourke's coat. She sat with the splinter in her palm for a long time, understanding it. Not Sedge, then, or not Sedge alone. Rourke himself had come in the dark, the night before his grand arrival, to make certain the horse would be exactly as wild as he had already promised the county it would be. The great breaker did not trust his own methods enough to meet an honest horse. He had cheated. They had all cheated, every one of them, and they were so certain of winning that they had grown careless. It was proof. It was not yet proof of anything she could use. A splinter was a splinter, but it was a thread, and Tamsin had learned long ago that a whole life can hang on a single thread, if you know how to hold it. She dressed the wound again, the last of the clean linen, a salve of comfrey and honey from her father's receipt, working by feel, her bare fingers reading the heat of the flesh the way another woman reads a letter, too warm. Not poisoned yet, but angry. She talked to the horse all the while, low nonsense, the tone mattering and the words not at all, and Corvus stood for her with his ears swiveled back to catch her voice, trembling only a little now. "We're a matched pair, you and I," she murmured. "Everyone who ever got hold of us decided the way to make us useful was to hurt us quiet. And here we both still are, too stubborn to break clean." The horse blew a long breath as though he agreed, and rested his chin on her bent head, and for a moment the fear went out of the stable altogether. There was only the two of them, the small gold lantern and the enormous patient dark. She was still turning it over when the stable door opened and the Duke came in. He had not slept either. He came without a coat, in his shirt sleeves against the cold, carrying 2 cups of something that steamed, and he sat down on the straw beside her, as though a duke sitting in the straw at midnight beside his stable girl were the most natural act in the world. He handed her a cup. It was hot milk with honey, and a great deal of brandy, and it was, she thought, the kindest thing anyone had handed her in 8 years, precisely because he had not made a ceremony of it. "You should be asleep," she said. "So should you. Neither of us is going to be. So I thought we might at least be awake together." He nodded at the horse. "How is he? Frightened? Sore? He'll mend." She wrapped both hands around the warm cup. "It isn't him, I'm afraid, for tomorrow." He did not insult her by pretending not to understand. For a while they only sat, the wounded horse breathing above them, the lantern throwing its small gold world against the dark. "I have been lying to you," the Duke said at last. "By omission. You should know it before tomorrow." He turned the cup in his good hand. "When I told you Rowan died in Spain, that was true. But I did not tell you how. We were in the same charge. His horse went down and mine did not. I turned back for him." He lifted the ruined hand into the lantern light and looked at it without flinching, for once. "A saber took the reins and 2 fingers and most of my nerve all in the one stroke, and I could not hold on, and I could not pull him up behind me, and I left him there. I rode out of that field alive, because my hand failed at the exact moment it mattered most, and my brother did not. That is all of it, Miss Reeve. That is the man you have been teaching to be brave." It came out of him then in a low, steady flood, as though a wall he had braced for a year had given way at the base. He told her about the heat and the noise and the smell of it, about the way Rowan had called his name. Once, not even afraid, only surprised. About the surgeon's tent and the fever after, and the long gray voyage home, to a house that still had his brother's boots by the door. How he had sold Rowan's things, all of them, everything but the horse. Because the horse was the one piece of his brother still breathing, how that same horse had tried to strike him down each time he came near, and how for a long while he had stopped taking any real care of himself at all. "I stopped writing to anyone," he said. "I stopped riding out to the tenants. I turned away callers. I let the accounts go to a thief, and the yard go to sedge, and the estate go gray, because it felt like a kind of penance, and penance was the only thing that made the mornings bearable." He looked at the wounded horse. "And then a stable girl turned her back on the animal that had tried to kill me, and it followed her like a lamb, and I understood, all in one moment, that I had spent a year mistaking my own guilt for his hatred." She did not answer at once. She had learned that the worst thing you can do to a confession is meet it too quickly. "For a year, I have believed that horse hated me because he knew," the Duke went on very low, "that he could smell it on me, that I am the reason his rider never came home. And every time he lashed out at me, some part of me felt it was no more than I deserved. That at least one creature on this earth had the sense to see what I was." His voice did not break, but it thinned the way ice thins over deep water. "I think I have spent this whole year believing I had it coming. It seemed only fair. And there it was, laid bare in the straw between them, the thing under everything." Tamsin set down her cup. She did not reach for his ruined hand, and she did not tell him it wasn't his fault, and she did not weep at him, because pity was the one thing that would have finished him, and she loved him. She knew it in that moment, plainly. But she could give him something in its place, not comfort, but company. inside the grief, which is the only honest answer to a man who has handed you his worst. My mother died slow, she said to the lantern, not to him. Fiver, when I was 10, my father could gentle any wild thing on earth, and he sat by her 11 days and could not gentle that. I watched him learn that some things won't be soothed, only sat with. That's what he left me. Not the horses. Just that. How to sit with a thing that can't be fixed, and not look away, and not lie to it, and not leave. She met his eyes. So I know a little about believing you deserve the worst that ever happened to you. It's a lie, Leander. The world isn't just. It's only cruel sometimes to people who did nothing to earn it. You, me, him. Then she said, look at him. The Duke looked at the horse. He isn't broken, Tamsin said. Vane, Rourke, the men before them, the whip in the dark. Every one of them set out to break that horse into something that would do as it was told, and not one of them managed it. And do you know why? Because a broken thing isn't safe. A broken thing is only quiet, and it stays quiet exactly until the moment it isn't. She turned to face him fully in the small gold light. You don't break a creature to make it yours. You can't. Break it, and all you own is the wreck. The only thing worth having is the thing that could leave, that knows the door is open and stays anyway, because it has decided you are worth staying for. That is not weakness. It is the bravest thing a living creature can do, and that horse has done it, wounded, for you. She swallowed. So don't you dare tell me you deserve to be broken. Not in front of him. He'd be ashamed of you. For the length of several breaths, the Duke did not move at all. Then he reached out slowly, with his ruined hand, not for the horse this time, and laid it against the side of her face, the seamed and broken palm impossibly gentle. And Tamsin, who had flinched from no man and no horse in 8 hard years, leaned into it and closed her eyes. We a creature that had decided someone was worth staying for. Tamsin, he said. Just her name. He had never used it before. Their foreheads touched. The horse lowered his great head over them both, breathing them in, and the cold stable was, for one impossible moment, the warmest place in England. Neither of them moved to make it more than it was. There was no need. They had already said the truest things two people can say in the dark, and the small distance left between them was not a barrier now, but a promise, kept on purpose for a morning that was not this one. His thumb moved once, slowly, along her cheekbone, and she thought, the way she had once thought it about the horse, there you are, not broken after all. And then from far down the frozen drive, cutting through the dark like a blade through cloth, came the sound of carriage wheels on gravel and men's voices, and the grinding of the gate. Michaelmas had come, and Vane had come early. They came before dawn on purpose, Vane's small cruelty, to deny her even the last hours of the night. By the time the sun cleared the hills, the yard was full. Buyers and gossips and the merely curious, muffled against the cold, breath rising in a single white cloud over the rail. Vane stood at the center in burgundy and sable, and Rourke stood beside him in his bruise-colored coat, coiling a long whip through his hands, smiling at nothing. Tamsin had not slept, and it showed, and she did not care. She had spent the last black hours doing the only thing left to do, sitting with the horse, keeping him quiet, changing the dressing one final time, and she came out into the gray morning with straw in her hair, and Rowan's bridle over her shoulder and her chin up. She felt the crowd's eyes crawl over her and find her wanting, and she let them find her, so she had been found wanting by far better people than these. "The hour has come, Your Grace," Vane announced, loud enough for all. £90, or the demonstration. Show us the gentle, rideable animal you promised, or stand aside, let Mr. Rourke prove the beast for what it is, and let the law take its course with the horse and the girl." Tamsin stood at Corvus's head inside the pen. The horse was calmer than he'd been. She had spent the night's small remaining hours with him, but the wound wept along his flank, and she knew, and Vane knew, that no saddle could go on him without turning that wound to fire. She could not ride him. That had always been the trap. The trap had never once been about whether she could gentle a horse. It had been about making the one proof they'd demand, the one proof she could not give. "She stalls," Rourke called out, playing the rail. "You all see it, 19 days, and she can't get so much as a saddle near him. Let a professional show you what the animal truly is." And before the Duke could answer, Rourke ducked under the rail with his rope and his long whip and started across the pen. He never reached the horse. He got within 10 feet, cracked the whip once against the frozen ground, to establish authority, no doubt, and Corvus, who had learned in the dark on 2 separate nights exactly what that green coat and that sound meant together, came apart. He rose off his haunches with a scream that put the whole front rail back on its heels, and the great Josiah Rourke, the man who spoke fear fluent, went over backward into the mud and scrambled for the fence on his hands and knees with the speed of a man who has just remembered he is mortal. The crowd roared. But it was ugly laughter, and it was turning. See, the beast's a killer after all, and Tamsin watched the verdict form on 300 faces in real time, watched Vane's smile come home to roost, and knew she had exactly 1 moment left to change the story before it set hard into fact. So she would not give them that proof. She would give them a better one. "I'll not be putting a saddle on this horse today," she called out, and the crowd murmured, and Vane's smile bloomed. Because this horse was whipped in the dark 2 nights ago, here, along his flank, exactly where a girth would sit, by a man who was paid to make certain I'd fail this morning. The murmur changed its shape. "I'll show you gentle. But first, I'll show you the truth." She turned to the horse, and with her bare hand flat and slow, parted the black hair over the wound so that the front rail could see the long, deliberate welt beneath. A woman gasped. And into the pen held high in Tamsin's other hand for all of them to see, went the splinter, a chip of green-painted wood, still crusted dark. "The color of Mr. Rourke's coat," Tamsin said. For 1 instant, Rourke's smile faltered. 1 instant, but 300 people saw it. "A lie," Vane said quickly. "A scrap of painted wood proves nothing. The girl is desperate." "She is," said the Duke of Aldermere, stepping into the pen. "So am I. Desperation makes a man thorough." And he raised his voice, and it carried to the last soul at the fence. "For 19 days, Silas Vane, you have hunted this girl. You should have used the time to look to your own house, as I have looked to it." He held up a sheaf of papers. "I have spent this fortnight, and rather more of my money than I care to admit, becoming acquainted with your affairs. Sir, you are bankrupt. You have been bankrupt for 2 years, propped up on borrowed paper and other men's debts, including a bond you bought from a dying man for a fraction of its face, and have squeezed at usurer's interest ever since, which the magistrate assures me is not enforceable and never was." A ripple through the crowd. Vane had gone the color of tallow. "I have here signed statements from the moneylenders in Leeds who hold your notes. From your own head groom, Sedge, who is pleased to explain, in exchange for not being prosecuted, precisely who paid him to leave the stable unwatched on the 17th night, and precisely who slipped in through the dark to use the whip once the way was clear." His pale eyes found Rourke, "You'll find your name in more of these than you'd like, Mr. Rourke." Rourke was already backing toward the gate. "I have bought your debts, Vane," the Duke said, and there was no drawer of vellum, no theater in it, only a cold and total finality. "All of them this morning. As of an hour ago, I own every shilling you owe in the north of England, which means I own you rather more completely than you ever owned this girl. Miss Reeves' father's bond is void by law and burned by my own hand, besides. And if you are on my land in 5 minutes, or in this county by nightfall, or if the name Tamsin Reeve is ever again heard to cross your lips in any tone I would not care for, I will call in every note you hold and see you in the Fleet before the week is out. You came here to watch a girl destroyed. For your amusement," he lowered his voice. "Go home and watch yourself." Silas Vane opened his mouth. Nothing came out of it. He looked for the first time in Tamsin's long knowledge of him, like exactly what he was, a small man who had run out of other people to stand on. 2 of the Leeds moneylenders who held his paper were there in the crowd. Tamsin saw them trade a single glance and begin, without any hurry, to work their way toward him through the press, and she understood that the Duke had not merely beaten the man, he had handed him to his own creditors in front of every soul whose good opinion Vane had spent a lifetime purchasing. For 8 years, Silas Vane had been the largest thing in Tamsin's sky. She looked at him now and saw, with something close to vertigo, how small he had been the whole while. How small they all are, the people who rule us by fear, in the very instant that someone simply declines to be afraid. He turned and he went, and the crowd parted from him as from something diseased, and his carriage rattled down the drive, and out of Aldermere, and out of her life, for good. But the county had not come to watch a man leave. They had come to see a horse. So Tamsin gave them the last thing. She stepped back from Corvus's head, out into the open middle of the pen, and, with 300 people holding their breath, she turned her back on him. And the Duke of Aldermere, with his ruined hand held open at his side, stood still and unafraid beside his brother's horse. Corvus looked at the man who had left his rider in a Spanish field. He looked a long, long moment, and then, gently, with the whole weight of his great wounded body, the horse lowered his head and laid it against the Duke's ruined hand, and kept it there, and the man bowed his head over it and wept without shame in front of the staring county. For a moment nothing in the yard moved. The wind fretted the gatehouse flags. And 300 people who had ridden and walked and driven out into the cold expressly to be entertained by a girl's ruin found themselves instead the accidental witnesses to a thing each of them would describe a little differently for the rest of their lives, and not one of them would ever quite manage to make small: a ruined man and a ruined horse. One in the plain gray light, forgiving one another for the crime of having survived. Nobody laughed this time. They had come to watch a joke. What they got instead was the plain sight of 2 broken things deciding, out loud, to trust, and there is nothing in the world an English crowd can do against a thing like that, but fall silent, and take off their hats, and go quietly home changed. By afternoon, the yard was empty again, and swept and strangely peaceful, the way a place is peaceful after a storm has finally spent itself. Tamsin found the Duke in the pen at dusk, sitting on the mounting block with Corvus grazing loose beside him, the low sun turning the frost to fire along the rails. She came and stood by him. Neither spoke for a while. It had all happened, and now that it had happened, there seemed to be a great deal of quiet to get through before either of them could find the far side of it. Mrs. Boer. Ada had tried to send her to bed, and to a hot bath, and to a proper meal, and Tamsin had submitted to none of it. She had come out to the pen because the pen was where the day had left her heart, and because she did not yet have the least idea what she was to do with a life that had, quite suddenly, and for the first time, no walls around it at all. "The bond is gone," she said finally. "Truly gone, Ash," he agreed. "You are no man's debt, Tamsin Reeve, not Vane's, not mine. I want you to hear that from me plainly, because I know how your mind works. I have watched it work for 19 days. He turned to look at her. "I bought Vane's paper to break Vane, not to buy you. There is nothing in that stack of debts with your name on it. There never will be. You owe me exactly nothing, and you are free, this evening, to walk down that drive and never look back, and no one on this earth could stop you or fault you for it. There it was laid open between them like a gate left wide. She could go. For the first time in her whole life, she could simply go. And the dizzy, terrible truth of it was that she did not know whether she wished to. Not from any doubt of him. She had never in her life been more certain of anything than she was of the man standing in the frost with the horse's breath fogging white around them both. It was that wanting had always been the very thing that got a person hurt. Want a full belly, and go hungry. Want a kind word, and be mocked for it. Want a home, and be reminded daily, in 100 small ways, that you were only furniture that happened to eat. She had made herself very small and very safe by wanting nothing at all, for 8 years, and here was this man asking her, without once saying the words, to be enormous, and unsafe, and alive. And she understood, all at once, what he was doing. Because it was her own trick, turned around and handed back to her. He was not chasing, he was not cornering. He was standing very still with the door thrown open, making himself worth coming back to, and letting her choose. "You learned," she said, and her voice was not quite steady. "I had a very good teacher." He rose from the mounting block. He did not close the distance he left it there, for her to close or not as she pleased. "I'll not ask you to stay for a wage, Tamsin. A wage is a leash by another name, you taught me that too. And I'll not ask you to stay because you're grateful, because gratitude is only debt wearing a kinder coat." He drew a breath, and she saw that it cost him more courage than the horse ever had. "So I'll ask you, the only honest way I know. Not as your employer, not as a duke." The ruined hand came up, open, unhidden. "Marry me, be Duchess of Aldermere. Not so, I might own you, but so that no man living can ever again believe he might. I know what the word will buy you, because I have watched, these 19 days, what its absence has already cost you a name. No creditor can seize and no gossip soil past mending. The freedom of every library and every stable in 3 counties, the sight of every lord this and lady that who would gladly have watched you torn apart in my yard. Afternoon sport stepping down off the pavement to let you pass. And it will buy you the one thing you have never once in your whole life been permitted to own. The perfect certainty that you may say no, to me, or to anyone, on any morning you please, forever, and the ground beneath your feet will not so much as tremble for it. Let the whole county call you your grace and mean it, and then, when you are as safe and as free and as unownable as any woman in England, stay. Not because you must, because you looked at a broken man and a broken horse and a house full of grief, and you decided we were worth coming back to." Tamsin looked at the open hand. She looked at the horse grazing easy in the last of the light, and the man standing there with his whole scarred heart held out and nothing hidden, asking for the one thing he had finally understood could never be taken, only given. "I have wanted things before," she said. "I learned not to. It was safer." She was silent a breath. "My father wanted my mother," she said, "and he lost her, and it very nearly killed him. And near the end of his own life, he told me he'd not have traded a single day of the wanting to be spared 1 hour of the losing." I thought grief had addled him. I didn't understand a word of it. She looked up, at the Duke, at the horse, at the impossible open gate of the rest of her life. "I think I understand him now." She stepped forward and laid her bare, scarred hand into his ruined one, and felt his fingers close around it as though he'd been drowning and it was land. "I don't want to be safe anymore, Leander. I want to stay." He laughed, that same helpless, unlocked laugh from the round pen, and pulled her in, and kissed her there in the frost with the grief of the year falling off them both, and Corvus, disgusted, lipped loudly at his master's pocket for a carrot, and got for once entirely ignored. When at last they broke apart, breathless and undignified, and laughing, the sun was full down behind the hills, and neither of them had felt the cold at all. They were married 3 weeks after Michaelmas in the small stone chapel at the edge of the estate, with the moor going gold and russet around it, and the first hard frost sparkling on the churchyard grass. There were no lords. There was no London. Mrs. Ada wept into her apron and pretended she had a cold. The grooms scrubbed themselves raw and stood in an awkward, beaming row. The old vicar lost his place twice for watching the bride. The tenants came, all of them, in their Sunday best, filling the little chapel to its cold stone walls and spilling out among the graves. For the new mistress of Aldermere had, in a single winter, ridden out to every farm on the estate, learned every name and every grievance, and settled more of the latter than the old Duke had managed in a decade. They did not come because she was to be a duchess. They came because she had already, quietly, become theirs. Tamsin did not wear the spinster's gray she had worn for 8 years. She wore deep forest green, the exact green of the single thread worked through Rowan's browband, a thing the Duke had noticed and ordered and never explained, and that she understood without being told. And when the vicar pronounced them man and wife, Leander did not give her the polite, chaste kiss of the aristocracy. He gathered her against him in the cold, bright chapel and kissed her as though she were the only warm thing in a long winter, which for a while she had been. The news reached London within the week, and London did not know what to do with it. There was no scandal to be had. That was the maddening thing. The ruined spinster had not been ruined. The stable girl with 4 shillings and a knack had walked into the most dangerous yard in the north, and walked out mistress of it, wearing one of the oldest coronets in England. Silas Vane was seen no more. It was said he had gone abroad, or to prison, or simply to ground, and no one troubled to find out which. The great Josiah Rourke found his engagements cancelled one by one as the story of the green splinter traveled, and took his bruise-colored coat somewhere it was not yet known. As for the Tun, it recovered as the Tun always does, by deciding it had seen the match coming all along and angling within the month, for an invitation to a house it had spent a year pretending did not exist. The new Duchess declined most of them. She was, she found, extremely busy, and Tamsin Reeve, who had once counted her years in horses, learned to count them in something else. Spring came late to the moors that year. The frost let go, the gorse blazed gold along the hills, the wound along Corvus's flank healed to a thin, pale line under the black, and then even that faded. And, on the first true morning of it, soft air, larks going up, the whole world smelling of thawed earth, Tamsin stood at the penrail and watched her husband do the thing that had once seemed as far out of his reach as the dead. He mounted his brother's horse. No saddle, he'd never needed one for this. Just Rowan's old snaffle and the ruined handlight on the rein, and the good hand buried in the black mane, and Corvus stepping out beneath him, easy and proud, the two of them moving together the way Rowan and this horse had once moved, the way the Duke had believed he would never move again. He rode a slow circle of the pen. Then, at a touch, an open gate, and the whole green moor and horse and rider went up the long rise at a canter, joyous, unafraid, until they were only a dark shape against the morning, and then over the crest, and gone, and back again, laughing, alive. She had taught him that. Not the riding, he had always known the riding. She had only taught him the thing that lives underneath it, that you cannot hold a living creature by main force. Not a horse, and not a grief, and not a heart. And that the very moment you stop trying to, it will come to you of its own accord, and stay, because it wishes to. It was nearly the only thing she knew. It had turned out in the end to be enough. Tamsin watched them, her bare hand shading her eyes. She thought of a gray autumn morning half a year and a lifetime ago, the hired crowd, along the fence, the wager whispered, through a plank wall, the shut stable door, and the vast, dark thing shifting its weight behind it. She thought of the men who had gathered to watch her die for their amusement, so certain of the ending that they had crowded the fence to enjoy it. They had meant it as a joke. All of it from the very first had been meant as a joke played at her expense. The mud-poor stable girl with notions above her station handed the unbreakable horse so the county could laugh. Well, she had never much minded a joke. It was only that this one, in the end, had turned out to have a punchline. Nobody at that fence had thought to expect, and Tamsin Reeve, Duchess of Aldermere, standing bare-handed in the spring sun watching her whole impossible life come cantering back over the rise toward her, found that she was laughing too. If Tamsin turning the tables on Vane and Rourke, and that grumpy, grieving, gloriously loyal Duke finally riding again, left you cheering, you're exactly who this channel is for. There is nothing on earth quite so satisfying as watching a quiet, underestimated soul be handed a trap and turn it, patiently and completely, into a life. If this story warmed you, do give it a like. It truly helps more people find these tales. Share it with anyone who loves a clever heroine and a scarred, soft-hearted hero, and subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss the next one. Tell me, down in the comments, what was your favorite moment? The moment Corvus lowered his head into the Duke's ruined hand, the green splinter, or the very last laugh. I read every one.